good morning, and happy Sunday. Hashtag my global family. This is Drea Beta, coyote walking in this world, and real life Esleta Pueblo superhero. I am also incredibly proud to be pastor of Coyote's Lodge, House of Spirituality, Critical Theory, and Medical Marijuana. Our services drop here on Sundays, family, and I'm so excited you could spend this moment with us. We are going to be working on our spiritual selves today, family, in hopes that we can create humanizing change and love in all of our communities. And family, as tradition, I'm going to go ahead and open our service with a prayer. Don't forget, family, Coyote's Lodge, House of Spirituality, is a place where we nourish our spiritual selves through critical reflection, and critical theory means that our readings are not coming from a house of God or from a book of God, but rather from actual lived experiences, sociological studies, or traditional ways of ontologies or epistemologies, our traditional ways of knowing and being, family. This coyote loves to use Napi and coyote trickster stories in order to make sense of my indigenous lived experiences. Don't forget, family, we are also the House of Medical Marijuana, which means that we are open to alternative ways of healing and knowing. And this coyote's medication is literally a lifesaver. We are going to open our prayer with the act and ceremony of smudging, family. All of our cultures from around the world have some sort of act or ceremony in which we cleanse our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and our spaces. As I take the stage and I offer it up to our ancestors, I ask for their blessings and for their guidance. Dear Gammy, it's your favorite trickster coyote grandchild. I know, I've been up to no good again, but it's all for a good cause. Dear Gammy, today we're going to be talking about women, race, and class, and the lived experiences that we have not only in our past society, but in our current lived realities. Gammy, I knew you were my first example of what a warrior woman could do in this world, and you shaped the world in your own ideas and images, and not the other way around. Please send all of your peoples that strength and guidance and courage to stand up for themselves and love who they are. Thank you, Gammy. I miss you and I love you. May you rest in peace. Hi, Papa. It's Trey. I miss you, Papa, and you were the epitome and the example of unconditional love. Thank you for always providing a safe space for me and for making everything okay with a hug and a tortilla, honestly. I love you, Papa. May everyone have the same space and person that they can go to in times of need, because we know that love goes a long way to healing our wounds. I love you, Papa. May you rest in peace. Dear great-great-grandpa Pablo Beta, true revolutionary and Esleta Pueblo statesman, I do honor to your name, and I don't know how you did it, Papa. How did you wrangle with the government and the powers that be? Institutions are frustrating. Please send us some patience and send us some guidance as we work through policies in order to make real change that is authentic and caring and humanizing for all of our communities and children. To all of our ancestors, both blood, related, adopted, and anyone who has treated us with kindness and respect as a human person, and you have gone before us, send us your blessings as your modern day warriors today as we continue to survive and thrive in 2021. May you all rest in peace. At this time, family, we are going to take a moment of silence for our Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. If you do not know what an Indigenous Land Acknowledgement is, family, it is when we take a moment of time, a moment of silence, a moment of prayer, and we reflect upon the land upon which we're standing. What wars were fought, what battles were lost, what slavery what trauma has happened, what blood was spilled upon this land. How did we get to where we are today? What peoples were displaced? And how do we start the path of healing, family? As a proud Sleta Pueblo warrior, I currently stand in New Mexico, where we are represented by 23 unique and amazing indigenous communities. Please send us your blessings as we acknowledge the history of this land. Don't forget, family, that coloniality and empire building has affected the entire world. And regardless of where you are in North America or South America, around the world, every nation has been affected. So please reflect upon the original indigenous people of the land upon which you stand. At this time, family, I'm also an advocate for medical marijuana. And I make this offering, and I give thanks to have the ability in the state of New Mexico to freely partake of my medication. Clearly acknowledging my incarcerated brethren around the United States and around the world who have been unjustly imprisoned and incarcerated for the use of marijuana. Remember, family, that the war on drugs was a political move of social control against certain communities of color and poor white communities, and the school to prison pipeline dehumanizes and hurts all of our communities. So please join me in changing the world and changing one mind through one conversation at a time. Now today's service, family, is very special to me, and the readings today are near and dear to my heart. Today we are reading from Angela White Davis's Women, Race, and Class. We are going to be reflecting upon how the abolition movement and how white women in general use that movement to create allyships with their black sisters at the time. Page 39. As they worked within the abolitionist movement, white women learned about the nature of human oppression, and in the process also learned more important lessons about their own subjugation. In asserting their rights to oppose slavery, they protested, sometimes overtly, sometimes implicitly, their own exclusion from the political arena. If they did not yet know how to present their own grievances collectively, at least they could plead the cause of a people who were also oppressed. The anti-slavery movement offered women of the middle class the opportunity to prove their worth according to standards that were not tied to their role as wives and mothers. In this sense, the abolitionist campaign was a home where they could be valued for their concrete works. Indeed, their political involvement in a battle against slavery may have been as intense, as passionate, as total as it was because they were experiencing an exciting alternative to their domestic lives. And they were resisting an oppression which bore a certain resemblance to their own. Furthermore, they learned how to challenge male supremacy within the anti-slavery movement. They discovered that sexism, which seemed unalterable inside of their marriages, could be questioned and fought for in the political arena. Yes, white women would be called upon to defend fiercely their rights as women in order to fight for the emancipation of black people. As Eleanor Flexner's outstanding study of the women's movement reveals, women abolitionists accumulated invaluable political experience, without which they could not have effectively organized the campaign for women's rights more than a decade later. Women developed fundraising skills. They learned how to distribute literature, how to call meetings, and some of them even became strong public speakers. Most importantly of all, they became effective in the use of petitions, which would become the central tactical weapon of the women's rights campaign. As they petitioned against slavery, women were compelled simultaneously to champion their own rights to engage in political work. How else could they convince the government to accept the signatures of voteless women, if not by aggressively disputing the validity of their traditional exiles from political activity? And as Flexner insisted, it was necessary, quote, for the average housewife, mother, or daughter to overstep the limits of decorum, disregard the frowns or jeers or outright commands of her menfolk, and take her first petition and walk down an unfamiliar street, knocking on doors and asking for signature to the unpopular plea. Not only would she be going out unattended by husband or brother, but she usually encountered hostility, if not right abuse, for her unwomanly behavior. Now, dear family, I want you to reflect upon our first reading and talk about that spark, that inspiration, and those real life tools that these women learn in the struggle, in the collaborative movement of abolition of slavery at the time period in the United States. They used those skills and reformed them in order to push for the suffragist movement a decade later, as stated in the readings. And I want you to ask about that. These middle-class white women during this time period were literally under the auspices of their husband, right? During this time period, women still have the ideology, okay, forgive me, to this day, in some households, in some communities, in some countries, in some societies, women are still chattel to their male relatives, which means property. They have less rights. They are subhuman. They are treated as subhuman to their male counterparts, specifically because of the gender to which they were born. And in this movement, during this time, white women get woke. They get awakened to their own role in subjugation within the context of patriarchy. And they began to see an ability to change their own status, to change their own role in society through political advocacy. Women's rights, gender rights, was not a personal issue, but rather a political one. One that could be fought in the courts, one that could be fought through petition, one that could literally be argued in the masses and be passed into law to protect people with rights. So I'm asking you, family, during this time period of inspiration, what can we learn in 2021? How can we, as continuing this fight for women's rights? Because let's be honest, family, gender equality is not a reality that we enjoy. Neither in the United States nor throughout the world right now in 2021. It is evident on every aspect on scale, including professions, including how much money is earned, including representation in the media, in the arts, in the sciences, family. It is male dominated by patriarchy. So I'm asking you, the fights that our ancestors were literally fighting for hundreds of years ago, right, or 100 years ago, how they still apply to the fights for humanity and the fights for equality and equitable access to resources today, especially during COVID, when access to employment and housing and education are incredibly important to our ability to create opportunity for the next generation. I am incredibly fearful, family, as an indigenous, two-spirited person, that we might not see Native Americans in college anymore. That our communities will take such a devastating hit, not only because of the tradition keepers, the traditional keepers, language keepers, actual cultural keepers, right, our elders of communities that were hit incredibly hard during COVID. We have not yet had the full understanding of how that is going to hit our communities, right? So the devastation that we are currently experiencing individually, per household, per community, although they might seem isolated, and in fact are connected. So I'm asking you, family, we were learning about women and the fight for abolishing slavery in the United States, and those fights have not ended. We are still fighting for communities of color that have been incarcerated, which is the new form of slavery, family. Because once you become a criminal in the United States, you literally have signed your life away, have signed away your ability, apparently, to be a citizen of this country. You lose your right to vote, you lose a lot of your employability, you lose your freedom of movement and your rights, and our companies and corporations continue to profit off of our pain. They continue to make profit off of the prison industrial complex and industries like the potato industry or call centers that are now being moved into prison complexes. I'm asking you, family, when are we going to take the time to learn from our past so that we might be able to create a new future? The next reading that I'm going to go ahead and talk about is how the allyships between white women and freed black men like Fredrick Douglass helped to move forward the women's suffragist movement. Right? So we're talking about, as an indigenous warrior, as an indigenous two-spirit warrior, I work with white people. As a whiteness scholar, my job literally is to create white allies. I work with white communities. We talk about racism. We talk about what authentic, humanizing collaborations can look like. We talk a lot about language. And literally, we looked at the first example of white women being allies to imprison and enslave blacks in America during the time period. The second example is another example of allyship, but it's the reverse. It is freedman. It's the Seneca Falls Convention, family. And it's Fredrick Douglass, and he's speaking on behalf of the women's suffragist movement in support of them. And actually, without his actions, the movement wouldn't have gone forward, especially at this convention. So let's go ahead and listen again on how allyships and collaborations between different communities, diverse communities from diverse backgrounds, can actually help us politically. When we create those humanizing collaborations, family, we can create actual and authentic change in our real lives. Page 51, Early Women's Rights Campaigns. Among the approximately 300 women and men attending the Seneca Falls Convention, the issue of electoral power for women was the only major point of contention. The suffrage resolution alone could not unanimously, The suffrage resolution alone was not unanimously endorsed. The controversial proposal was presented at all, however, was due to Fredrick Douglass. Douglass's willingness to second Stanton's motions and to employ his oratorical abilities in the defense of women's rights to vote. During these early days, when women's rights was not yet a legitimate case, when women's suffrage was unfamiliar and unpopular as a demand, Fredrick Douglass publicly agitated for the political equality of women. In the immediate aftermath of the Seneca Falls Convention, he published an editorial in his newspaper, the North Star, entitled "The Rights of Women." Its content was quite radical for the times. Quote, "In respect to political rights, we hold women to be justly entitled to all we claim for men. We go further and express our conviction that all political rights, which it is expedient for men to exercise, it is equally so for women. All that distinguishes man as an intelligent and accountable being is equally true of women. And if government only is just which governs by the free consent of the governed, there can be no reason in the world for denying to women the exercise of the elective franchise, or a hand in making and administering the land of the law." End quote. Fredrick Douglass was also responsible for officially introducing the issue of women's rights to the Black liberation movement, where it was enthusiastically welcomed. As S.J. Walker points, Douglass spoke out at the National Convention of the Colored Freedmen that was held in Cleveland, Ohio around the time of the Seneca Falls meeting. He succeeded in amending a resolution defining delegates so it would be understood to include women. An amendment that was carried with 3 cheers for women's rights. I want you to think about that family. The allyships between women suffragists at the time, the Black liberation movement, and amazing civil rights advocates like Fredrick Douglass at the time, although civil rights advocates wasn't exactly the terminology they used. But they all created collaborations in order to create the change that they needed to happen politically at the time. Although, as I've pointed out numerously, we are still engaged in those struggles today. The inequality in the workplace, the discrimination that we face, I'm trying to coin this family, microaggressions, death by a million cuts. Because I'll be honest, as a quote-unquote young person coming up in academia, I am tired of being microaggressed on the daily at my own institution, either in my role as a graduate student, my role as an instructor in higher education for the last 8 years, or as my experience in teaching for the last 12 years. It hurts. And I honestly am terrified that the colleagues that I am currently teaching with, whose ages are different from my own by 10 years, 15 years, that their remarks that this is normal, that they get critiqued as well, that isn't an indication that they have become so normalized to this violent and aggressive behavior that they accept it. I refuse to accept microaggressions in my life, family. I refuse to be controlled by harmful and violent ideology, which is why I'm a critical theorist in the first place. Why I'm a pastor of a spiritual community, literally trying to start a movement, family, to change the way we see religion, spirituality, and how we walk in the world. So I'm asking you, I am begging you, 1, learn our history. Figure out how our past literally can predict how we're going to be treated today, and predicts how we came to the socioeconomic and political situations that we currently find ourselves in during COVID. These scenarios are politically, historically, and legally constructed. The cradle to prison pipeline, the prison industrial complex, the fact that the United States is ruled by oligarchs and the 1%, it is not a fantasy, but this is political and historical reality. And until we, as the general masses, take the initiative to educate ourselves and to work on authentic policies and humanizing practices and lift us all up, that's what this coyote is working towards. That is my plea to you, family. Open your hearts, open your minds, and embrace the unknown. Embrace our brothers, our sisters, our non-binary siblings. Embrace those that speak different languages from you. Embrace those that might have a different religion, a different citizenship, a different outlook on life, a different sexuality or gender. Go make friends and create family. Because when we are family, that is when we truly can lift each other up. That is when we truly care about the outcome of our lives, because we're not strangers, but rather we are a community united by love. This coyote loves you, and I'm off to go cause trouble somewhere else. Please join us here during the weekday. We have our daily prayer. Our Facebook also has our weekly services that drop here on Sundays, family. But don't forget, if everything is not okay right now, it is not you. It is this dehumanizing situation that COVID has created and precipitated within the context of coloniality and empire building. So don't forget, you're never alone, and this coyote and pastor is only a direct message, a phone call, a DM, or an email away. I love you. I'm off to go cause trouble somewhere else.